Passengers in the aviation sector are set for hard times as domestic airline operators in the country have jacked up airfares by a minimum of 100%, with one-way economic ticket now selling for 50,000 naira. This development is coming barely less than 10 days after the airline operators in Nigeria had warned that the skyrocketing price of aviation fuel by over 100% to about 400 naira per litre within a year would lead to increase in price of tickets in order to sustain their operations. It will be recalled that the price of aviation fuel, popularly known as Jet A1, was increased between 420 naira to 450 naira per litre on Sunday, depending on the city, as against the 400 naira per litre it was on Thursday, without prior notice to the airlines, with a prediction that it could raise to about 500 naira per litre in a few days. It will interest you to know that since the commencement of the hike in the air transport fares, air passengers have been groaning over the high cost, are describing the hike as too exorbitant, hereby seeking for government intervention and a downward review to the prices. Of the prices. Now, to make us understand this better, of course, and the impact on the aviation sector, I'm being joined live via Skype, the Chief Executive Officer of Cowrie Assets Management Limited, Mr. Johnson Chukwu. Good afternoon, Mr. Chukwu.
Good afternoon to you, and thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for your time. 100% hike in aviation airfares. Looking at what is happening with regards to aviation fuel. And on the other side, we are still grappling with issues around adulterated fuel, that's PMS, for us, for the motorists and those using PMS. So it's two in one, hiking the price of fuel in some states and across the country. What do you make first of these two developments?
Well, starting from the aviation, the air freight increase about 100% in air freight. I think basically what is happening is that beyond the fact that the airlines are absorbing additional costs as a result of increase in jet fuel, in aviation fuel, but I also think to pass on 100% increase in airfare is also quite exorbitant. The reality is that it's not just fuel that is the operating cost of airlines. So I do not think an increase of 100% in fuel cost should lead to a 100% increase in airfares. What of the other operating costs that may have increased? Granted that the airlines have been dealing with depreciation of the naira, but good thing that the central bank has been supporting them. I'm aware that the central bank has been supporting the airlines to provide them and giving them access to airfares. So an increase of 100% in air freight as a result of increase of 100% in aviation fuel is exploitative, and I'll tell you why. The reality is that because we are not in positions to move around the country by roads, or we don't have effective rail system, and the roads are now infested with kidnappers and all sorts of criminal elements on the road, people are now forced to go by air, which means the airlines have what we call market power. They are the one that determine price because we are all by, it's now a seller's market. And I think that's the reason why they can afford to increase fares by 100%. Ordinarily, if it was a buyer's market, they would have adjusted the price marginally so that they have absorbed part of that cost, while users of their amenities or facilities, I mean, air travelers will also absorb part of that cost. But to pass on a burden above the burden they are bearing, for me, it doesn't add up.
Let me follow up by saying that on availability of forex, which you also touched on, for spare parts and maintenance, looks like something that is very important. Someone said, was just trying to explain this situation, said if they don't do this, some of these airlines the aircrafts might just start dropping on air. So maybe they didn't have a choice. And we also have not heard anything officially from the likes of the NCAA. Does it look like they're just allowing market forces take charge?
Well, I think what we have seen is the market force or market forces. Like I mentioned earlier, today, because most people cannot travel by road for fear of being kidnapped or accident, because the roads are also death traps, and there is no effective rail transport system in the country. People are compelled to fly. You can't imagine people fly from here to Ondo to go to Ekiti because they can't afford to enter road and drive to Ekiti. You fly all the way to Akure, and then you drive from Akure to Ekiti. Because ideally, this is what we used to do in the 90s, and you can wake up in Lagos by 4 p.m. and drive tickets. But you can't do that because you are afraid you will be kidnapped along the way. So people are now compelled to fly, and that means there is the demand for air services is far above the supply, and that's why I say that the market power is now resides with the airline operators, and they can actually dictate the price, because we are all, it's now a seller's market. We are all compelled to buy whatever price they set to us, and that's the only reason why they can pass the entire burden of an increase in fuel to the consumers, and even burden the consumers beyond the burden they are absorbing. I have mentioned earlier that I'm aware that the airlines have to bring in their spare parts from outside the country. Maintenance is also dollar denominated. But I also say that the central bank has been supporting them in terms of buying with FX to meet some of these compulsory obligations. But to increase 100% in air tariff as a result of fuel increase, for me, it simply means they are front loading or passing on other costs to the consumers.
Support at times, many of these practitioners will say might not be enough. We also see support manufacturers always still come out to say it's not enough, they are not getting what they that's actually on one side. What will be the impact of this if it continues on the likes of inflation? We already see what's been happening with the price of PMS. In some states, it's not really been so that they approve pump price at the moment. And all of this are moving on in 2022. What effect do you think this could have moving on in the year?
I think we should expect an uptick in inflation rate in the month of for the month of February. You know, the inflation rate in January came at 15.6%. It dropped about 0.03%. But that will reverse this year. Beyond the increase in air freight, we also know that land transport costs, and our road transport costs have also increased as a result of the shortage of fuel supply occasioned by off-spec fuel importation. So we've seen transport costs across the country increase, and we also know that once transport costs increases, then business people will also increase their cost because they have to pass on the burden of moving their goods around the country, across the country at higher cost. So I think we should expect a higher rate of inflation in the month of February when the figures come out in March. That's clearly unavoidable. Transport costs have increased. I also believe that we will see an uptick in other consumer goods costs that require to be moved from one part of the country to the other.
So the economy now goes for about 50K, that's 50,000 naira, and return tickets for more than 100,000 naira. Do you think this could also affect traffic, despite the fact that you say that we don't have a choice because of the security situation, we have to fly, but do you think it could have any effect on passenger traffic moving on?
Yes, it could, but it will be very marginal. Some people may now reconsider some of the trips they make. Now that we also have virtual platforms, if it's not absolutely necessary for you to make that trip, some people will cut down on their travel, on their rate at which they travel. But if it's compulsory for you to travel, you have no choice. And that's why I keep emphasizing that it's a seller's market. Because we really don't have alternative means of transportation in the country other than air transport. So for those who fly, they are very cautious of their time, but beyond the time savings, they are most apprehensive of going by road because of the various risk associated with road transport in the country today. In the past, it used to be a delight for us as a young men then to enter a car in Lagos and drive to the east. But you wouldn't dare do that. I can remember when I used to leave Lagos by 2 p.m. and drive all the way to my town. But if you want to do that, you want to commit suicide. So that's how bad the situation has gotten. And that's why air transport has become a necessity instead of being a luxury, which is what it used to be. It used to be the preserve of those who had surplus resources. But now it has become a necessity that even those who are just trying to eke out a living will think it is better for them to arrive safe than to arrive with regrets.
It's better to be safe than to be sorry, like they would always say. Let's now stay with some other challenges facing the aviation sector. We know that there's been a little bit of drop in growth figures thanks to COVID-19. And, we thought that there was this gradual recovery on the way. globally before Omicron and all of that came up again. What's your outlook if you are to look at the aviation sector, both domestic and, of course, internationally?
Let's start from the domestic aviation industry. I think we've seen a very significant recovery, driven partly by the factors I've mentioned earlier. Yes. The recovery in the local aviation industry also seems to be higher than what has been achieved globally. Because elsewhere, people do not have the same risk that we are subject to in the country when you need to travel locally. And in several countries, they have very good road infrastructure. So people actually take a delight to drive around. But that's international passenger traffic. We've seen recoveries. And now that virtually all the countries are releasing the lockdown, UK, for instance, has completely stopped almost all restrictions. So we're going to see a material increase in international travel traffic, particularly as we approach the summer seasons, when some people who had to forgo their travels in previous periods instead of COVID may now bounce back in the current year, provided there is no new variant of COVID that comes up before the summer period. So if the current health condition or COVID condition persists throughout the summer season, I think we're going to see a huge international air traffic in summer, because, like I said earlier, many families who couldn't travel for 2 years will now, once they have the necessity, will now want to jump into the next available international flight to go on holidays.
We've seen series of support, of course, from government and sometimes private sector for the aviation sector, particularly at the time of the lockdowns and all of that, aircrafts packed and all. What would you say about that? And moving on with this kind of challenge of aviation fuel in Nigeria, do you think there should be more support from government to help, bear a little bit of the burden so that passengers don't bear the brunt in total?
What the government can do is to reduce the taxes that are imposed on passengers for traveling on local flights. Like, if the government recognizes that traveling by air in Nigeria has become a necessity and no longer a luxury, then some of the progressive taxes, some of the very steep taxes that they imposed on passengers on tickets can be reduced so that make it more appealing for people to use the airlines, and as well as reduce the burden that consumers of that service or users of aviation services have to bear to move around the country. So the key thing that government can do is basically to focus on the taxes. As it relates to the issue of price of aviation fuel, it is completely deregulated, and as long as it's deregulated, it is not advisable that the government step into that area. The other thing, which is a medium to long term, will be for government to focus on developing critical transport infrastructure, road infrastructure, rail infrastructure. So the alternative infrastructure facilities, traveling by passenger facilities. Elsewhere in the world, they have bullet trains that are almost approaching the speed of aircraft. So you could actually travel from here to Abuja in a bullet train in 2 or 3 hours. So if I have to make Abuja in 3 hours, why would I have to go out and wait for a flight for 1 hour and drive from the airport to the town in about 1 hour? So, but the key thing, we don't have these facilities. If we have this, then the aviation industry will be very moderate when they want to increase tariff. But I do not think the government should step in as it relates to fuel. If the government has to step in, let them focus on taxes and reduce the taxes that are imposed on use of aviation services in the country.
It's a good way to leave it. Always interesting talking to you, Chief Executive Officer, Cowrie Assets Management Limited, Mr. Johnson Chukwu. Thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us. We appreciate this.
My pleasure.